Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. This episode, I'll be talking about how Secretary of State Antony Blinken orders LGBT flags flown at U.S. embassies, will name special envoy for gay rights. Jumping over to the state of Illinois, a mother alleges her teen committed suicide due to COVID isolation, sues the Illinois governor. Finally, COVID 19 says we should trust the scientists or should trust the science. I would back the CDC recommendations because that is really based on data. We didn't fully appreciate that early on, but it's less likely for a child to get infected in the school setting than if they were just in the community. It's funny, why wasn't he like that 4 months ago? Perhaps it was because there was an election coming forth, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. The Federalist reports Biden administration paves way for federal regulations, imposing unlimited expense on Americans. Finally, CNN Kremlin critic Alexey Navalny appeared in a Moscow court on Tuesday in a bizarre and heated hearing in which the politician ridiculed suggestions that he should have communicated with parole officers while he was in a coma. That's bananas. How am I supposed to report to you, friends? I've been asleep for the past month. I know comas aren't sleeping, but I'm exaggerating for effect. So, jumping over to Breitbart. LGBT activists are cheering Secretary of State's Antony Blinken's announcement that he will reverse an order from President Donald Trump and put up pride flags at the U.S. embassies around the world. Outfront magazine reported on the development. The Biden administration is off to a hopeful start as Secretary of State nominee Antony Blinken has confirmed a recommitment to LGBTQ rights. In a memo from July 2020, former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper released a list of flags permitted to be displayed at U.S. military bases. Missing from the list was the LGBTQ pride flag, which Esper compared to the Confederate flag. Prior to the ban, embassies raised the flag during Pride Month on the official embassy flagpole. During the hearing, Blinken also confirmed that he plans to appoint an envoy for the human rights of LGBTQ persons, a position created by Barack Obama in 2015 that wasn't filled by the Trump presidency. Blinken claimed violence against that demographic increased while Trump was in office. We've seen violence directed against LGBTQI people around the world increase, Blinken said. And so I think the United States playing the role that it should be playing in standing up for and defending the rights of those people is something that the department is going to take on and take on immediately. Raising the pride flag is one way to outright show LGBTQ solidarity. Biden is the first U.S. president to openly embrace a full range of queer rights, including transgender equality, Outfront magazine reported. And that is an outright lie. That is gaslighting. Biden has a 50-year history of basically thinking gay individuals were a national security threat, for thinking that gay men should not have the right to be married, for thinking a lot of really bad things about the LGBTQ community. So don't say that he is the first president to openly embrace a full range of individuals, of people of this community's rights, because he's not. He has made his career over basically not allowing people of the LGBTQI community to have the same rights as cisgendered individuals, for heterosexual individuals. He has made his career over fighting against change. He's the establishment. He wanted everything to stay the same. And now I guess memory only serves, only goes back 6 months, only goes back a year. They're not willing to go back in time. And then they'll just say, and a lot of people just say, well, people change, people apologize, people, say they want to change. And no, don't say he's the first one to openly embrace it if he's made his career out of bashing that community, bashing your community. Say, hey, he has terrorized our community in the past, and we're going to hold him to account today because he has a history of marginalizing the LGBTQ community and will ensure that he is upholding his promises he made to our community, because he has a history of also breaking promises. How long has it been since he's talked to Black Lives Matter activists? How long has it been since he's talked to groups that he's promised to have taken care of since he was elected? He has the only promises he openly embraces are promises to ensure that his pockets are lined with money. Let's jump over to the lawsuit in Illinois. Trevor Till took his life on October 21st, 2020, during the coronavirus pandemic mandated school and student athletics closures in Illinois. The mother of the teen is now suing the Democrat governor over COVID 19 restrictions, telling Fox News, "My son died because of self isolation." Trevor Till was a promising student athlete at Seneca High School. According to his mother, Lisa Moore, Trevor was hoping to go to the state championship to compete in pole vaulting. Track season was cut short for Trevor due to the coronavirus, and Moore believes 100% that the lockdown changed Trevor from who he was to the person that did this, according to the Faulkner Focus. The parents of 3 other student athletes joined Moore in suing Governor Pritzker, citing that their children are suffering severe emotional and physical harm because of the restrictions, according to Chicago Sun-Times. Their winter sports season was canceled. The lawsuit claims that Pritzker's cancellation is an unconstitutional violation of the plaintiff's right to equal protection under the Constitution of Illinois. So I don't really understand how this would be an unconstitutional violation of equal protection, unless you can make the argument of college sports were still having a thing and high school sports weren't allowed to participate in the same sports college sports were. Perhaps that would be equal protection. If women's sports were allowed but not men's sports. But I don't see just how basically the governor saying no high school sports being allowed would be considered unequal protection. I'd be interested to see how they concluded that that would be the best argument to be made. My argument would just be, why did you shut it down? Winter sports, winter track is probably one of the most COVID safe sports you could do. You are not on top of each other. It is non-contact. People are running individual. Track is fair, unless you're doing a relay race. Track is an individual sport. It's bananas. So I don't really understand why they would even shut down track and field. They should encourage it. You should encourage increased cardiovascular health, because it is shown that if you are fit, you are less likely to get severe symptoms of COVID-19. So why aren't they pushing for more people to compete in track and field? It doesn't make any sense. Trevor was devastated that he didn't have this senior year track and pole vaulting season, and that the final blow was when winter sports were canceled, the lawsuit reported. It also noted that Trevor's suicide was a proximate cause of which was Governor Pritzker's restrictions on high school sports programs. He is a teenage boy. They need their friends. They need the interaction. They need the socialization. That's what the mom said. He was the student in the classroom that raised his hand, got the conversation going, doing that from Zoom, doing that from his bedroom. It was not the same feeling for him. And I agree, kids need the interaction. They need the socialization. They need their friends, especially when they're teenagers. They do not have the mental strength to deal with prolonged isolation. That's why you use what is it called in prison? When they keep you isolated from the rest of the people in prison. I can't think of the word right now, but that's why they use that isolated confinement, whatever term that they use. That's why they use that even for the most hardened criminals. It breaks them, because severe isolation is just mentally crippling. Your mind can only take so much. But when you're a teenager, you don't have any of that mental strength to deal with that isolation. You just don't, and you're easily broken when you're that young. And that's why you're seeing increased suicide amongst teenagers, in my opinion. Jumping over to Dr. Fauci, now that he wants to back the CDC recommendations because it's based on data. But funnily enough, in October 21st, 2020, NPR dropped 3 research studies that basically stated the exact same thing, and he didn't buy it. I think it's suspect because the election was only a few weeks away. Trump promised to reopen schools. Dr. Fauci said, I don't really trust that science. Despite widespread concerns, 2 new international studies show no consistent relationship between in-person K-12 schooling and the spread of coronavirus. And a 3rd study from the United States showed no elevated risk to childcare workers who stayed on the job. So what does that mean? So that study from the US basically means that if you're a childcare worker in the United States and you stayed on the job, your risk of developing symptoms from COVID-19 were no different than somebody else who remained on the job in a different field. So if you were both at a 5% risk, you'll both be at a 5% risk of contracting coronavirus. Combined with anecdotal reports from a number of U.S. states where schools are open, as well as crowdsourced dashboard of around 2,000 U.S. schools, some medical experts are saying it's time to shift the discussion from the risks of opening K through 12 schools to the risks of keeping them closed. As a pediatrician, I am really seeing the negative impacts of these school closures on children. Dr. Daniel Dooley, a medical director at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C., told NPR she ticked off mental health problems, hunger, obesity due to inactivity, missing routine medical care, and the risk of child abuse, on top of the loss of education. Going to school is really vital for children. They get their meals in school, their physical activity, their health care, their education, of course. While agreeing that emerging data is encouraging, other experts said the United States as a whole has made little progress towards practices that would allow schools to make reopening safer, from rapid and regular testing to contact tracing to identify the source of outbreaks to reporting school-associated cases publicly, regularly, and consistently. We are driving with the headlights off, and we've got kids in the car, said Melinda Boutin, chair of the Department of Health Policy at Vanderbilt School of Medicine, who has argued for reopening schools with precautions. So this is bananas, right? So, and then here is a research emerging evidence. Nowhere the research found was there a spike that coincided with reopening. What we found is that the school being open makes absolutely no difference. Alvarez told NPR, and that was someone from Spain. We're not sure that the environment of the schools may not have a small and systematic effect, said Alvarez, but it's pretty clear that they don't have a very major epidemic changing effects, at least in Spain, with the measures that are being taken in Spain. So I don't understand. Why can't the U.S. use the same policies being used in other parts of the world where they're not seeing big changes in caseloads? Definitely, it seems like the teachers' unions have a lot more say than the local politicians, and it seems like Dr. Fauci will only say what the Democrat Party wants him to say, which at the time was do not open schools, do not say the things that will help get Trump reelected. And now it's hurting the Democrats that the schools remain closed because people aren't receiving the checks, and they're like, hey, I still can't go back to work. And you're saying that it's now going to take months when you said you're originally going to crush the virus with your plan. Now you're saying that you can't do anything about it, and now it's going to take months to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And I still can't go to work, and I'm not getting checks, and my kids are still stuck at home. And while my kids are still stuck at home, I can't work. It's getting ridiculous. And people need to be held accountable. I don't understand the fetishization of Dr. Fauci. He is not that sexy, and he has been wrong more times than he's been right. On to the Federalist. Biden administration paves way for federal regulations imposing unlimited expense on Americans. The same day that President Joe Biden assumed office and signed executive orders mandating masks on federal land, a rule he promptly broke, loosened immigration protections, and waged war on biological sex, he also issued a memo enabling the expansion of bureaucratic regulations to promote a socially progressive agenda. In a process that Biden describes as improving and modernizing regulatory review, the president ordered the director of office, OMPB, to consider certain political aims such as public health and safety, economic growth, social welfare, racial justice, environmental stewardship, human dignity, equity, and the interests of future generations as benefits when weighing the costs of certain executive departments and agencies' actions. And the interests of future generations. I'm going to talk about that for a second. So, future generations, what would be in the best interest of future generations? Probably not racking up unlimited debt, friends. Why? So they say, we want to spend unlimited amounts of money to ensure that the environment is clean for future generations. But why even be concerned about that if they're going to be under a crippling amount of debt come 2 generations from now from the policies to enact a climate change policy, which would only change the temperature by 1 degree Celsius, right? what is going to be more crippling for a future generation? Just an oppressive amount of debt, or climate change? And I know that seems rather simplistic and it seems like a simple answer, but you also have to see it if you're, I understand if you're doing it fiscally responsibly, right? If you're being responsible in the way you spend your money, but if you're just saying we will spend whatever it takes to make this change, then you are not helping the future generations. You're actually doing the opposite. You are helping yourself feel better at the cost of the future generations who are going to be the ones responsible for footing the bill. Our nation today faces serious challenges, including a massive global pandemic, a major economic downturn, systemic racial inequality, and the undeniable reality and accelerating threat of climate change, Biden wrote. It is the policy of my administration to mobilize the power of the federal government to rebuild our nation and address these and other challenges. As we do so, it is important that we evaluate the processes and principles that govern regulatory review to ensure swift and effective federal action. Regulations that promote the public interest are vital for tackling national priorities. Now, instead of evaluating whether a new policy proposed or implemented by a federal agency is worth the cost, the OMB will have to take the political values that advance Biden's progressive agenda into account as a reason and potentially a benefit to keep or move forward with that policy. In other words, bureaucrats can now claim their rules provide some intangible benefit that outweighs any financial cost the regulation imposes on Americans. The Trump administration had required all administrative agencies to perform a cost-benefit analysis. No more. Under his new expanded definition of benefits, Biden encouraged the bureaucratic offices to promote regulations that continue to advance any of the listed political goals, increasing the ability of executive organizations to exercise their power and oversight. During his time in office, former President Trump took the opposite approach to executive departments and agencies, often limiting their power and restricting the reasons for why regulations should continue. In 2017, Trump signed an executive order tasking a group of regulatory reform officers with enforcing these limits, such as mandating that for every new executive directive issued by an agency, 2 other regulations must be rescinded. And that made a lot of sense. Basically, he was saying there's too many regulations in place, it's crippling businesses. So if you feel the need to impose a new restriction, then you need to get rid of 2 old restrictions to benefit the American people, because you can't just keep adding restrictions, because eventually you'll have no freedoms if you just keep restricting each freedom one by one. You either need to write a restriction that's so good that you no longer need 2 of those restrictions, or 2 of those restrictions no longer apply to what's going on in 2020. And that makes a lot of sense. Biden, however, undid many of Trump's changes using his executive powers, including issuing more than 40 executive orders in the first 2 weeks of his White House tenure, which, by Biden's own words, would make him a dictator. Kremlin critic Navalny calls Putin a little thieving man in heated court hearing. That's hilarious. I can't wait till we find out if his underwear gets poisoned again. Let's find out what happened in Moscow. Kremlin critic Alexey Navalny appeared in a Moscow court on Tuesday, where he ridiculed claims that he broke his parole conditions while in a coma and launched an extraordinary attack on Russian President Vladimir Putin, denouncing him as a little thieving man. Navalny was detained 2 weeks ago upon his return to Moscow from Berlin, accused of failing to meet his parole terms under a 2014 suspended sentence for embezzlement, a case he has dismissed as politically motivated. Prison authorities are now seeking to replace his suspended sentence with a 3.5-year prison term, a move that could further inflame the anti-government protests that have engulfed Russia for the past several weeks. A perennial thorn in President Vladimir Putin's side, Navalny has spent 5 months in Germany recovering from Novichok poisoning before his return to Moscow on January 17th. He has blamed the attack on Russian security services and Putin himself, accusations that the Kremlin has repeatedly denied. There was a large security presence outside the court. Oh, sorry. In court, Navalny demanded to know how he could have better informed authorities of his whereabouts while comatose. Can you explain to me how else I was supposed to fulfill the terms of my probation and notify where I am? He said from his glass enclosure in the courtroom. A prison service representative responded by asking why he had not provided documents to explain the serious reasons that prevented him from showing up for inspections. Coma? Navalny shot back. Why are you sitting here and telling me the court you didn't know where I was? I fell into a coma, then I was in the ICU, then in rehabilitation. I contacted my lawyer to send you a notice. You had the address, my contact details. What else could I have done to inform you? He said. The president of our country said live on air he let me go to get treatment in Germany, and you didn't know that too? In a separate outburst, Navalny described Putin as a little thieving man in his bunker who doesn't want me to set foot on the ground in Russia. The reason for this is the hatred and fear of one person who is hiding in the bunker. I've offended him so deeply by the fact that I've survived. When a prosecutor tried to object, Navalny snapped back, I don't need your objections. He can pretend he is this big politician, the world leader. But now my main offense to him is that he will go down in history as Putin the Poisoner. There was Alexander the Liberator and Yaroslav the Wise, and there will be Vladimir the Poisoner of Underpants, Navalny added. He is not engaging in geopolitics. He holds meetings on how to smear underwear with chemical weapons. A CNN Bellingcat investigation in December implicated the Russian security services in Navalny's poisoning, piecing together how an elite unit at the agency trailed the activist and his team for years, including on the trip to Serbia when Navalny fell ill from exposure to military-grade Novichok. Navalny also duped one of the agents into revealing that he was poisoned with the nerve agent Novichok applied to his underwear. Putin himself said in December that if Russian security services had wanted to kill Navalny, they would have finished the job. And then they go on to talk about the mass detentions and where people who align with him politically and his family members are also being detained. So it's crazy what's going on in Russia right now. It seems pretty similar to what's going on in the United States, to be honest, and it's quite disgusting. And he brings up a good point. If his lawyer contacted the courts in Russia and basically said, hey, our guy's in a coma, he's seeking treatment, how is he supposed to report to his PO, right? How is he supposed to report to his parole officer if he's in a coma? Doesn't make any sense. And Putin acknowledged that he's receiving treatment in Germany. So even the president of Russia understood that he was in a coma. So what is the problem? And the problem is Navalny is a threat to Putin. And as soon as he stepped foot back into the country, he allowed himself to get captured. But I think he's doing it in a way, in a way of sorts, to become a martyr, a political martyr. So allow himself to be arrested, sort of a Nelson Mandela sort of figure, because he's trying to prove a point, in my opinion. We'll see how it plays out. But as of now, I think he wants to be arrested. I think he went back in order to expose the corruption that is going on in Russia. And I think if he finds himself dead in prison in Russia, there will be hell to pay in Russia. There will be a mass rioting. You'll see lockdowns like crazy in Russia. Something similar to what happened in Washington, D.C. after the Capitol riots. You'll see that happen in Russia. It's going to be real interesting to see the similarities between Joe Biden's Washington, D.C. and Putin's Russia from here on out, with the political unrest due to hypocrisy and just incoherentness of policy, especially since this guy was in a coma, right? How is he supposed to report? That still boggles my mind. How's he supposed to report to his parole officer? The dude was in a coma. His lawyer went out of the way to say he's seeking medical treatment. Putin even admitted this guy's in a coma. He's seeking treatment. So what's the deal, guys? What's going on? Use a little common sense for a change. Politicians, just an ounce of common sense. That's all we need. So before I continue to the lighthearted segment of this episode, why don't you go ahead and smash that like button. comment if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel if you've yet to subscribe. And if you'd like to contribute to the show, please go to notsuchidiot.com/donate. You'll find links available where you could help us out. Every little bit helps, and we wish to stay free from outside influence. So let's get going to something that I saw that made me laugh. From the LA Times, 6 arrested after changing Hollywood sign to HOLLYBOOB. 6 people were arrested Monday after scaling steep terrain around the iconic Hollywood sign and strategically changing it to convey what they said was a breast cancer awareness message, according to police. HOLLYBOOB, the sign briefly read, with a big tarp with the letter B on it thrown over the W and a strategically placed white dash to make the D another B. LAPD Captain Steve Laurie, the Hollywood area commander, said LAPD security personnel observed the 5 men and 1 woman on video surveillance at about 1:15 p.m. A police helicopter responded to the area, and flight crew were available to watch the group move back down the hill to a location on Mulholland Highway, where other officers and park rangers met them with handcuffs. If only they showed that sort of initiative. Excuse me, words are hard to say. Apparently, if they showed that sort of initiative during the riots last year, I would be impressed. But right now, I'm sort of disgusted. Because they didn't even vandalize. What they did didn't even permanently damage the structure. They used a tarp and a piece of cloth. So what they did was non-permanent. So they're not even being charged with vandalism. They're just being charged with 6 counts of misdemeanor trespassing, whereas people were tearing into stores on Rodeo Drive and looting and rioting, and the police did nothing for weeks. So I don't understand where this show of force is coming from, where, again, you're looting and rioting and there is zero show of force. Consistent standards, guys. These kids were playing a prank. They possibly were conveying a message, or so they claim. But definitely the show of force appears to be way off. You dispatch a helicopter and 6 police cars are there? Come on, screw you guys. The arrestees were not publicly identified and could not be immediately reached for comment on Monday. All 6 will be cited with misdemeanor trespassing and released, Laurie said. There's no vandalism because the sign wasn't damaged. The site is surrounded by Griffith Park, but is not accessible to the public and is privately maintained by the Hollywood Sign Trust. A representative from the trust said they were grateful for the fast response from the LAPD. I'm sure they were, because rich people love the police. It's unfortunate that such an important icon for the city of LA is not being appreciated, said Mark Panettiere, the group's chairman, who said trespassing to alter the sign was wrong no matter the purported cause. This is an icon that This is an icon that's there for visual reinforcement of the importance of Hollywood, not just for the city of LA, but to the world. It needs to be upheld. It doesn't need to be demeaned. Come on, dude. Again, it wasn't vandalized. It was a tarp. It was a piece of cloth. It was easily taken down. Even the police on the scene said we can only get them on trespassing because they didn't vandalize the sign. The sign. It was non-destructive. They put something over the sign. They put a tarp over letters to make letters appear differently than what they are. So come on. Let's tone down what's being said. Let's tone down your grandiose whatever your thoughts on the Hollywood sign. It's not that important. It's just a sign on a hill, friend, and it's been changed before. The sign was changed on New Year's Day 2017. It was changed to read Hollyweed. And even local citizens were saying it's probably just a gag. Alper says people trespass on the property all the time, but mostly get scared off by guards or rangers on bullhorns. So maybe the people from the board of trustees for the Hollywood sign were just offended that someone actually not got away, but actually managed to do something to alter the sign. That's one thing, but I don't believe that they should be. I don't even believe they should get a trespassing charge. I think they should get just get some community service, 10 hours of community service around the Hollywood sign. That should be their punishment. They shouldn't even have anything on their record because it's bananas. Why should something be on your record for a gag, especially when it's non-destructive? Don't understand. But That's going to be it for today, folks, unless the world decides to start burning, in which I will post another video. Until then, I'll see y'all tomorrow morning. Have a good one, friends. Bye.